Hi, folks. We're lucky enough today in the webinar to have a CEO of one of the picks we've got for the ASX, which we flagged as globally scalable. So Oleg Vornik, you're CEO of Droneshield. Welcome today. Thank you very much for joining us and giving your insights. So we're not going to talk necessarily, all the investment stuff. This is much more of a thematic style webinar. So, we've been diving into this so far and talking about rising defence budgets, cyber threats, geopolitical tensions, etc. I just wouldn't mind getting your comments generally on the geopolitical landscape at the moment and where Droneshield fits in with that.
We're seeing continued increase in geopolitical tensions, Mark. And I think if you look at human history generally, most of the time we have been in a state of conflict. And since the end of World War II and rise of nuclear weapons, I think we've been lulled into a bit of a sense of false security that things have permanently changed. And I think now we're just back to human nature, as it unfortunately is. And with it, of course, is the addition of technology to warfare. And Ukraine has really demonstrated the potential of the new technology of drones on what it means for conflict and war, and that while drones are not replacement of traditional platforms like tanks and artillery, they are a force multiplier, they're a disruptor, and you can do so many more things. Like, for example, we're seeing now Russian government, from what it seems, using drones to not just attack in Ukraine, but also harass its NATO neighbors. And there's the whole cost of symmetry, right? You're sending 200, maybe a couple $1,000 drones, and the other side is forced to respond if they don't have anything suitable specifically for drones, with very expensive assets like scrambling planes and using missiles. And if you'll be on the Russian side, this is great because you're draining your enemy of resources and you're also testing them for, well, how are you going to respond if I do this or that?
Absolutely,
It's a fascinating situation.
Yeah, I mean, there was a situation recently where NATO was even talking about that, saying, "Well, we're sending multi-million-dollar missiles to take out $100,000 worth of drones, etc." And I think it's always been a case that bigger is better in the defence industry, and that's very much changed, particularly in the last 5 to 10 years. You guys have been crushing it with the counter UAS solutions. So just explain your technology a little bit, and for those who are, not particularly tech savvy, what the advantage is with the Droneshield's products and technology.
So we use multi-sensor approach to detect drones and then different types of technologies to defeat. The core to the detection is the radio frequency. So you're listening for the connection from the controller to the drone, if it exists. So telling the drone where to go, unless it's GPS guided. And then the drone responds by sending the telemetry or its location back to base, or the video feed, and sometimes both, which is the downlink. And we can listen to that and detect the drone and triangulate its location and even sometimes location of the pilot. The secondary technology we use for our on-the-move and fixed-site systems on top of radio frequency is the radar, which you can think of as a motion detector in the sky. Mm-hmm. And for drones, you need specialized radars, because radars that have been developed for tracking large, shiny, metal-reflective objects in the sky, like airplanes and helicopters, really don't work against small drones being plastics, slow objects flying close to the ground, because you're going to start picking up all the ground clutter like humans, dogs, whirlybirds, trees. And so you need specialized radars. And then you would add cameras potentially. So a camera can be great when it's loose to cue from the RF and the radar to really give you the visual on the drone. And you can see, okay, the drone is carrying a grenade. Okay, maybe my response is different if it was carrying a camera. And I just want to have a footage, for example, of a drone. So that's quite useful. Sometimes you might have acoustics, which is listening for that sound of the engines or the blades of a drone. It's more for really high value situations where the customer says, I just want everything in one package. Yeah. And so you add that into, and then you stitch it all together. So we're a sensor maker as well as an integrator. So we do a command and control system called Drone Sentry C2. It looks like, the output looks a bit like Google Maps. So you have drones floating around and our sensors deployed and basically giving you the alerts. But then once you detect a drone, the question is, well, what do I do now? And sometimes, depending on the customer, you actually don't want to down the drone. In certain cases, we can tell you where the pilot is, so you can send security, apprehend the pilot, and solve the issue. So if you
Yeah,
are in a
wow.
prison, if you're an airport, if you're a data center, it's actually a better solution. You think about it, okay, I take down the drone, tomorrow the pilot comes with another drone, and then what? You keep doing that. But if you actually say, okay, I'm going to apprehend you if you do that, it's actually even a better deterrent anyway. So that's often for civilian situations. Now, of course, if you're at war, you need to actually do something about the drone if it carries something. So jamming is what we do. Now, jamming is relatively old technology, been around since World War II, but what we do is smart jamming. So you need to basically be able to jam things which don't want to be jammed, and the Chinese are very, very good at creating technologies which are resistant to jamming. And then you want to miniaturize the jamming technology. So it's relatively easy to create a jammer to take a whole back of a van, but to condense it in the form of one of our drone guns in a 3-kilo pistol product is relatively more difficult. Then on top of the jamming, if a customer says, again, like, I'm protecting a nuclear silo facility, I want everything. So then you potentially add protocol manipulation techniques. You have things like high-power microwaves. So we have our great friends in California with APRAS. And this is really the real-life version of the Matrix movie. So you're essentially sending this shock wave that fries electrics in anything that moves in front of it.
Oh, wow.
Be it a drone with an electronic circuit, be it even a car or a boat engine, and the drone just drops on the ground. Now, there are additional, it's amazing what technologies there are there. There are other technologies like lasers and guns, and you can certainly use those. One thing I would say very important for drone detection and drone defeat is that symmetry in costs that you've alluded to before, Mark. So unless you are protecting a super high value asset, it makes no sense to deploy $20 million on a facility protecting against $200 drones. So you really need to keep it in perspective. So our base systems go from tens to hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is considered adequate or affordable for the kind of cost of the drones themselves. And you can mass field them. Like, for example, we have more than 4,000 systems deployed worldwide. We have hundreds of systems in Ukraine. And that is in part because they're affordable. If you're making 10, 20, $100 million systems, how many of those is your customer going to buy? Not many.
Yeah.
So this is really important.
Yeah, I mean, look, we're very focused on European defence, and that's more of a NATO spending shift with Trump trying to get the Europeans paying for themselves, etc. And I mean, you're obviously having success. You guys are up for. I had you on the call, basically the Droneshield on the call, and was interested to see you're up for over $1 billion worth of contracts this year, and you've already started to grab some already. But is that are you sort of the same opinion? Is that the area you're focusing on at the moment there in Europe, as the the EU and a lot of those European countries start to increase their budgets?
Europe is the biggest opportunity. Historically, US has been 70% of our market, and I think US will eventually be our biggest market once again. But in terms of the relative percentage, Europeans this year woke up. They realized they can't just rely on the US, and they need something. Now, Europeans have this amazing challenge where the budgets are starting to flow, so that there's really kind of no lack of money. But defense is not an industry you can just turn on a tap and suddenly tanks and missiles and drones start flowing out. Things take time. So we're now seeing a lot of our customers finally get a lot of budgets, but the challenge for them is how to spend it, which is conveniently where Droneshield comes in. And especially with drones and counter-drone systems being right at the top of the spending priorities. So we had a $62 million order at the end of June that we completed delivery of in fairly record time. So we indicated to the stock exchange that we'll do it in a couple of months, which we did. And now we're seeing enormous amount of pipeline in many hundreds of millions for basically the same customers as we've already been selling to. They know our products, they know what to expect, they know how to get the money, but basically much bigger deployments. Because the thing that Europeans are seeing for counter-drone, which is not too dissimilar to every other customer around the world, is it's such a super nascent industry, right? So nobody thought about drone warfare 3 years ago when Ukraine just started. So our customers have either nothing, or they might have 1 or 2 systems when they need to get 100. So now the scramble is, how do you go from very low market saturation to kind of full deployment? And so important thing that our customers are learning when they see new technologies is they've seen situations in the past where they find a company they like and they buy 5 systems and delivery goes well, then they place an order for 500 and it breaks the company. So they're carefully scaling the size of the orders and saying, all right, well, how fast can you deliver? Is the quality good enough? And we have been doing pretty well. And so, like, for example, we have a customer in Asia Pacific. They placed a $12 million order with us in January, $32 million order with us in April, and now we have about $450 million dollars worth of pipeline in Asia Pacific, and so we're really well on path with this customer because of how quickly we delivered the orders as they were escalating in size. And we are also now in the process of increasing our manufacturing capacity from $500 million a year to $2.4 billion by end of next year, which is a lot of it about ability to deliver.
And obviously, I mean, the webinar's around security and defense, but we do love companies that, that do something. We had an AI hyperscaling and data centers webinar last month, and I was really liking the fact that the likes of, say, Goodman Group, they're hyperscaling the data centers for the bigger companies in the US, but they've also got that side business. Are there other commercial uses potentially for your product that might, in times of peace, might substitute in or have a bit of a side hustle for Droneshield?
Well, first I would correct about the time of peace comment. Military planners want to buy things during time of peace. It's a bit like, I'm going to say controversial thing. You don't want to be getting a bank loan when you're desperate for one. So same analogy for the military. Militaries want to buy and get ready during the peacetime, not during the war. During the war, it's a bit too late. You messed up if you are urgently procuring during the war. And also, remember, focus of the military is deterrence. So you want to build up your stocks and show that you're ready during the peacetime. But I think your question about the civilian market. So we think that over the next maybe 5 years, maybe a little more, civilian market has a potential to be as much as 50% of our revenues. We're now in the process of releasing an updated study on the total addressable market, and it will be showing much, much more than what we have previously displayed as we basically done previous study about 5 years ago, and it will be roughly similar split between the military and the civilian market. And I think it's the old story, like DARPA invented the internet essentially, but now it's a lot more civilian use. So if you think about the data centers, airports, stadiums, critical infrastructure, oil and gas facilities, metals and mining industry, where drones are basically creating disruptions and flying over the sites and harassment and so on. Corporates, where there's corporate espionage and terrorism threats, the amount of potential applications is significant. Which is why we released Sentry Civ product, which is our pure subscription-based product a few months ago, which is for, let's say, customers with bigger budgets like airports or data centers. Our defense-grade solution, which would be in hundreds of thousands of dollars, is affordable. But say if you're a stadium and you can only afford tens of thousands a year on a subscription basis, that is where you get Sentry Civ. And we think that also civilian markets are a lot more accustomed to paying for their solutions on subscription basis, as opposed to big upfront and then an element of it being on subscription, which is kind of what militaries would be finding more acceptable. So this is part of our subscription revenue campaign, where we are hopeful to get from current 5% of total revenues being subscription, the SaaS, to hopefully as close to 30 to 40% over hopefully the next 5 years or so.
Yeah, I mean, that's brilliant in terms of, I mean, every investor loves a SaaS business, that's for sure. So smoothing those revenues. So let's kind of nerd out a little bit now. Like, what's like the coolest thing you guys are working on at the moment, that even if it's kind of pie in the sky, at the conceptual basis, what's the sort of coolest thing you've got your guys looking into as it stands at the moment?
Well, of course, it's artificial intelligence. There's nothing else that would cut the mustard. So we started getting into AI about 5 years ago, when we realized we couldn't just keep having the old-fashioned library-based approach, where you basically have like a radio frequency equivalent of a fingerprint that drone communication gives, and then you match against the library, and that's how you detect. So we spent last 5 years building what we believe is the largest database of drone signals around the world, and all of the devices that we have deployed with customers' consent then send the data back to us. The library grows, or the data, the drone signal library grows, and then that enables our engines to get better. Now, the way it works today with what we call our FAI, radio frequency AI, the second generation, which is the current generation, that is about basically the engine can detect never seen before drones, but the way it learns is that every quarter we basically release a newer version of the engine, like 2.1, 2.2, etc., and then that engine would learn a bit better. Now, in about a year from now, we're releasing the third generation of that. What it does is that basically completely, fully learns on its own, on the edge, on the device, completely independently. And this is also why we're evolving the hardware to go with it. So what it means is that there's now all this conversation about in Ukraine, you basically have full redundancy of anything you throw at the drones every 2 weeks. And I mean, okay, that's probably a bit exaggerated, but it is a rapidly evolving cat and mouse game.
Obviously, it's very rapidly evolving, yeah.
Which is why we do quarterly software updates. But this is essentially not even quarterly. This is immediate learning as the device goes. So, so we have now an engineering team of about 300 people, which is the largest counter-drone engineering team in the world, and they're all in Sydney, and that's what a lot of them are working on.
Oh, fantastic! Yeah, that sounds amazing. I mean, look, yeah, obviously that technology is moving so fast, and you know, I hadn't even thought about. Obviously, you'd have to be pushing quarterly updates, and I mean, sort of back to I think it was something you mentioned just before. You know, that wider spectrum. I mean, how I'd be interested to know how that handles like drone swarms and things as well. Is the same technology just with more power used, or are they individual signals across each of them? Then you've got to, and it causes issues, or how do you handle that sort of thing? Because I mean, everyone's seen the videos on YouTube and things like that, but I'd like it'd be interesting to know how that works in real life.
So the technology we use for both detection and defeat is equally adequate for one drone as 100 drones. You can think about it maybe like we're having a call, so you have a Zoom call. It's as much of energy for you to talk to one person as 100 people, and or listening to one person as multiple people. So what our devices say, our Drone Sentry device creates is a bubble of protection, a multi-kilometer bubble of protection around the facility. And whether it's one drone or 100 drones that come in, they will all get individually tracked and then defeated at the same time. And it's a bit like every drone would hear the signal in the same way. It doesn't like sap the energy. So, so they're all effective. And this is advantage versus kinetic methods, because obviously if you are kinetically shooting, you go like one, next. And that's then advantage of the swarm, in that it basically says, okay, well, you might kill 50 of us, but the other 20 will achieve the mission. But when you're jamming, it's the same.
It's a common misconception that it's just the gun that you guys are producing, and it's where it was a real point of mine too. And I've had to correct people in the past that that may have been the case a while ago. It's not the case anymore. But obviously didn't know about the AI and the auto updates coming. But it kind of reminds me a little bit of Planet Labs when they started commercializing the satellites for the Google Maps and things like that. That story of like it started in military, but rapidly progressed to being that consumer base very quickly. And so, I mean, I'm very excited to hear about that, the commercial side and the civilian side leading up, because I really don't think that's priced in as it stands at the moment. I mean, despite the meteoric rise of the share price recently, I've been asked many times, is it overvalued? And I'm like, well, have a look at Palantir. So if the revenue matches the market cap, then yes, basically, if they're doing the right things. So it's been a bit of a watershed year this year. Like I think you're only about 180 million in contracts 2024 backwards, and then you've just blown that away this year, and particularly with your pipeline as well. So congrats on that. It's fantastic. I think it got to about a 4 billion market cap, I think, yesterday, and we're recording this on the Friday before. But I mean, is there have we left anything out? Is there anything more sort of interesting you would you want to bring up? You want to raise about what Droneshield's doing, etc., or does that pretty much wrap it up?
I think that's a good summary. So we're excited about the opportunity we have with our customers, where, as I was saying, the install base is so low, non-existent, and there's now real clear urgency. I think the geopolitics is for real, in the sense that it's not just Ukraine, it's not even just Europe. For example, we are working with South American militaries getting attacked by narcos using drones. Our Asia Pacific customers are being attacked by Chinese drones. We have US bases in Africa being attacked by Al-Shabaab drones. US, I mean, you probably heard some of the speech by the Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, and he's talking about the need for counter drone solutions. It's truly a global phenomenon, and there are very few people that can do it well. And you have an enormous amount of modes. So sometimes people ask me, well, what happens if Raytheon or Lockheed Martin decides to get into this game? And usually it's people that have no idea how Lockheed or Raytheon actually operate. And I would say, look, if you tell either of those two guys, these firms, which produce enormously well build big platforms, whether it's jets and missiles and whatnot. If you tell them, right, you need to, in the next year or two, build a product that would have this really sophisticated AI, and you'll be rebuilding every 3 to 4 years because the drone's developing so quickly. The product has to cost tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're going to do quarterly software updates. They will look at you like, no, you came to the wrong place.
No. We'll stick to making big margins on missiles, but again, that kind of reminds me of that the rise in satellites, basically, where it became commercial. Is that the big guys didn't want anything to do with it, and they ship, and it's really come. I mean, drones have kind of come from a consumer electronics background and then been militarized, as opposed to the other way around, and big organizations like NASA and Lockheed and things, they've significantly struggled with that. And culturally, they've got that building something like you guys have built is, that's the last thing on their mind. They would have their entire boards be railing against it because it's, that's the reason we have mapping, satellite mapping today is that someone strapped a smartphone to a satellite the size of a shoebox and NASA said it wouldn't work. You should spend $1 billion on a satellite. But it's the rapid rise of how good consumer technologies are, and really does make it gives, obviously the drones are so good now, you can weapon and they can be weaponized, that it's a problem they obviously didn't really foresee, but it's definitely a space that needs to be filled. And like I say, I just cannot see the big guys either having a culture. Their businesses wouldn't be a cultural fit to do all the things you're talking about, and they're not particularly. They can't pivot very well and very quickly, so they do tend to outsource quite a bit of those sorts of things as well. But I would expect that. It's one thing I continually bring up with clients and when I'm doing media is the value of the data as well. I mean, I didn't know about that database that you've got. I mean, that data is going to be, that's expensive data. Like, I don't think people realize how much data is going to be worth in years to come. And, the likes of even Intuitive Surgical, they're doing all these robotic surgeries, but they've got a 3 or 4 year lead on everyone. But the data they've got on those, from all those machines running around the world, or even self-driving cars for Tesla or whatever, I think that'll be a potential revenue source in itself, I would imagine. So exciting times for you guys. Thanks so much for joining us. And instead of just me rabbiting on, we get to actually hear from someone who's got the background in it. But we'll certainly keep up with you guys, it's one of the stocks we've recommended today in the webinar. So folks, Oleg Vornik, thank you.
Thanks for having me.
Cheers.